This is Vindolanda, a frontier town in northern England, which was one of the larger northern Roman outposts. Let me rephrase that. There were two parts to this. There was the military fort, or the garrison over here to the east, and then there was the town over here to the west. And the town fed off of the garrison, as many garrisons tend to have, and provided for the soldiers that came back and forth. Now, right now, we are at the bathhouse, and it has the underpinnings here for a hypocaust, or the heating area. So that sort of red brick would be the actual floor, and then underneath would be a place where fires would be lit to warm the water and the floor underneath. We would have our three types of baths: frigidarium, tepidarium, and caldarium. And we would also have places to hang out, to play games, to just sit and socialize and relax. This was sort of the social center for soldiers and whatnot off time, or other members of the community that would hop in and have some leisure time in here. It was also the only place we can find in the town that actually has a toilet. So as far as we can tell, everyone came here to use the toilets, and I'll just leave it at that. This is the north gate, beyond which would lie, well, the enemy. All the things that we are protecting ourselves against. One of the things I do want to point out are these little half semicircles, these semicircles sitting down in the middle of the ground. These were actually part of homes that were here before the Roman fort existed, but were buried underneath and became part of the foundation for the Roman walls. We're going to head on in and take a bit of a look through what looks like a giant field of nothingness and rock, but which actually has all sorts of stuff within it. Vindolanda is actually very well renowned for its discoveries, most importantly the discovery of writing tablets filled with all sorts of information and chats between people, letters between people, lists, proclamations, all these kind of things, even little writing exercises that kids were doing, or people who were newly part of the Roman Empire and didn't know how to read and write Latin, and who would be using these small pieces of strips of wood, writing down with ink and practicing their Latin. They were found, I love the whole process. And during this time, because of the geography of the place and the ravines down underneath, this is a very boggy place. It's a lot of swampland surrounding it down the lower shores, or lower elevations. And so all of these things ended up down in the depths, or even inside here. And the bogs and the swamps are places where there's no oxygen. And oxygen is what causes things to decay and to rot. And so these letters, these shoes, bits of leather, all of these things survived where other places had them lost, because there was no air in the ground. It's still, as you can tell, a live dig site. We still have a group of people who are finding more and more things. In fact, today they just found another Roman coin in and amongst all the fun and games and the rocks and the rubble. So this is also a place where you can volunteer and come spend your time doing some digging and checking the place out or taking what's been dug and washing and examining it and seeing what you can find. But it's quite a spot, and there has been a treasure trove of artifacts that have told us all sorts of things about Roman life at the time. Here we are at the heart of the fort, the Principia, the Praetorium of the Horae. Let's just pop that there so you can take a look. Okay. These are right in the middle of the fort, basically, and were the primary buildings, not to mention the what we call it now, the main bank and the security vault, where workers' pay or the soldiers' pay would be, where the emblems of the legions would be, all these kind of things. So this is the middle, the center of it all. We're currently in the middle of the Principia, or the headquarters building. This was where all of the records were kept, where all of the pay was stored, and where the standard, the emblem of each legion, was kept. It was a huge disgrace if an emblem was ever left behind or lost, and so this was the process, and this would be the room where it would be kept. And I'm not entirely sure if I should be walking on this, but yeah, I'm going to do it anyway. Beyond this would be our other buildings. This would be our Principe, or our leader's house. The guy with all the money and all the wealth in the process. You'll notice again this large underground system, or underfloor system, of air control, which meant his house would be heated and he would have slaves to take care of it. Oh, no, sorry. This is the granary and the stores building, and this underground piece would be made so that the air would be distributed around, and ventilation at the top meant that it would keep stuff from getting musty and rotting. Alright, in that case I have to realign myself and figure out where our leader's house is. From here we would be looking down Barrack Street. This is where all of the centurions, many of the centurions, would have been quartered. We'll take a look at this one just off the top. And in this room, this would be just enough space for 8 men, plus their gear. And occasionally, as time went on, they would add slaves or wives or children, but at the beginning, this was a spot for 8 men. Now, I don't know about you, but it could look a little bit tight for me. The standard process would be shared beds, sleeping in shifts, being watchful of all of your kit, and having sort of a cramped lifestyle. You'll notice that some of these have been split into two different spaces, but each one of these would have been a spot for 8 men to live. Now this one is exceptional, and let's take a look at this. In the summer of 2010, the remains of a 9 to 11-year-old child was discovered here in an unmarked grave dug through the corner of this barrack room. The child was buried shortly here sometime after AD 213 and before the middle of the 3rd century, so before around 250. And we're not entirely sure if the child was a boy or a girl. We know that they lived in the Mediterranean until they were about 7, and then brought up here, and by the time they were 11, they ended up here in a hole underneath the ground. Now, it was illegal to bury someone within the city, within the fort. So the most common guess is that this was to cover up a crime. This child had been murdered and their body had been buried. But we'll never know. It's one of those crazy stories. Fireplace there. One of the things you'll notice is that if we were to look at the doors on this side and the doors on this side, that they're offset. One door does not face the other across the street. That way, if all the doors were open, you weren't staring straight into someone else's room. Now, these rooms were pretty tight, pretty cramped, not much space for too much of anything until we get to these guys here, because this was the living space of the centurion. As the leader, he would have had a space which was roughly 20 times the size as the men that he led, given his elevated status. And so we'd be walking up these streets, going past all the common soldiers to the centurions at the top, and then up to the altar at the end. This one dedicated to Jupiter. So our soldiers would be living in here, doing their work. Our granaries and our principe over here. The walls would be facing on the way through. Then on our main entrance going out into the town with our guard towers on either side. Now, I love the way these are set up. Nice easy entry, and then walk along the walls. Now this is interesting. I love these ideas. The fact that this was once a fort in the 200s and 300s, but it didn't stay that way. The Romans left this region, and people continued to use it, continued to live and build here, and create homes out of what this once was. This is just a ruined field now, but for 1,000 years and change, it's been various types of buildings. And of course, as in all these buildings, the rocks and the stone that once formed these giant walls have now become the walls of castles, the walls of homes, houses of walls. They've all been reused and repositioned. So this is a rather interesting piece of the fort. It isn't actually even close to old. It was built in the 70s, and it was created as a reconstruction of the fortress and its buildings just to see what would happen and how long it would decay. And so this is a modern recreation of a section of Vindolanda's fort. They found that already, while the timber has aged, the area under the stone, the turf has actually been compacted up to 2 meters, which kind of explains the sinking of the process. Let's see if I can make sure I'm getting that right. There we go. Oh. No, it was the turf rampart. Okay. So, this part here has been sinking. I haven't been in here, but let's take a quick look. This would be a replica of the fort. You climb up to the second floor to get out onto the walls to do your watch, or head even further up to the third floor to our top floor for the best view. You'll be looking out over the landscape, keeping watch for enemies, incoming caravans or supply trains, all of those various things which may or may not be coming around. So here it is, a reproduction fort done over top of the town. This is the 9th fort that has been built here, the last one. The original, originally there were stone houses, but there was a wooden fortress that was built here before Hadrian's Wall, which is actually 3 times the size of this. So massive as it is, that fort and town would have extended well into that tree line at the far horizon. So there's always more to look at, and there's always more to find underneath the ground. But every time you dig and every time you uncover, you lose a layer. So when do you stop?